Greetings! This recording covers the lesson on steps and hypothesis testing. At the end of this lesson, you must have enumerated the steps and hypothesis testing. Let us start with the definition of hypothesis. Hypothesis is a statement about a population parameter developed for the purpose of testing. Hence, hypothesis testing refers to the procedure based on sample evidence and probability theory to determine whether the hypothesis is reasonable. Moving on to the steps for testing a hypothesis, there are variations. The difference is due to one's perspective, whether in the field of statistics or research in general. Another factor may be attributed to the availability of software packages to use in data analysis. The following steps are based on my experience, taking into consideration various reference materials. These are: first, state the null and alternate hypotheses. Second, set the decision rule. Third, select the statistic test. Fourth, perform the test on the sample. And fifth, make a decision. For better understanding on the terms used in the procedure, the following slides present the corresponding definitions, while a different lesson is allotted for the application of the steps identified. The first step mentioned about the null and alternate hypotheses. By the way, the term hypothesis, SES, is the plural form of the term hypothesis, SIS. The null hypothesis, usually represented by H sub 0, while others use H sub O, is a statement about the value of a population parameter. While the alternate hypothesis, usually represented by H sub 1, while others use H sub A, is a statement that is acceptable if the sample data provide enough evidence that the null hypothesis is false. Other authors use the term alternative instead of alternate because they mean the same thing, so do not be surprised. Also, alternate hypothesis is also referred to as the research hypothesis. In relation to hypotheses, the phrasing takes into consideration the test of significance, whether one-tailed or two-tailed. It is a one-tailed test when the alternate hypothesis states a direction. In other words, the statement is concerned whether a statistic is larger or smaller than the known parameter, while it is two-tailed test when the alternate hypothesis does not state a direction. It means that a statement is concerned whether a statistic is different from or is not equal to the known parameter. In social research, the two-tailed test is the default option. For clarity, the following are examples. Let us suppose we have this null hypothesis. The mean monthly allowance of students is 2,500 pesos. The null hypothesis is the same whether the test is one-tailed or two-tailed. The corresponding alternate hypothesis with a one-tailed test is the mean monthly allowance of students is higher than 2,500 pesos. Or it could be in the other direction, which is the mean monthly allowance of students is lower than 2,500 pesos. For a two-tailed test, it would be the mean monthly allowance of students is not equal to 2,500 pesos. Another example is with this null hypothesis. There is no difference between the mean monthly allowance of female and mean monthly allowance of male students. The corresponding alternate hypothesis with one-tailed test is the mean monthly allowance of female students is higher than the mean monthly allowance of male students. Or, phrasing it in the other direction, which is the mean monthly allowance of female students is lower than the mean monthly allowance of male students. While for the two-tailed test, it would be there is a difference between the mean monthly allowance of female students and the mean monthly allowance of male students. By the way, in social research, in which the default selection is two-tailed test, the usual phrasing of the null hypothesis is this: there is no significant difference in the monthly allowance of students when classified according to gender. For the second step, the following are relevant terms. Decision is subjected to the probability of two possible errors, denoted by alpha and beta. The type 1 error is denoted by alpha. It refers to rejecting the null hypothesis when it is true. It is the level of significance, also referred to as the level of risk. It may be any value between 0 and 1, but the most frequently used are 0.01, 0.05, and 0.10. In social research, it is usually 0.05, while the type 2 error is referred to as beta. It is accepting the null hypothesis when it is false. Please be reminded that these errors are possible because we consider sample only. Had we considered the population, then we don't need to do the hypothesis testing or applying inferential statistics. Prior to the availability of the statistical software packages, the decision rule was comparing the test statistic against the critical value. In other words, the test statistic refers to a value calculated from sample information used to determine whether to reject the null hypothesis, while the critical value refers to the dividing point between the region where the null hypothesis is rejected and the region where it is not rejected. Additional information may be provided by presenting the corresponding p-value. P-value refers to the probability that the value of the test statistic is as extreme as the value computed when the null hypothesis is true. The decision rule indicates the condition or conditions when the null hypothesis is rejected. Nowadays, the decision is based on the p-value against the set level of significance for ease of interpreting the results. If the p-value is greater than or equal to the level of significance, then do not reject the null hypothesis. If the p-value is less than the level of significance, then reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternate hypothesis. Taking into consideration the tests of significance, in a two-tailed test, the rejection region is evenly split between the upper and lower tails, while in one-tailed test, all of the rejection region is in either the upper or the lower tail. For clarity, the following are examples. First is with these hypotheses. The null hypothesis is the mean monthly allowance of students is 2,500 pesos. The alternate hypothesis is the mean monthly allowance of students is not equal to 2,500 pesos. The decision rule if the chosen level of significance is at 0.10 would be, if the p-value is greater than or equal to 0.10, then do not reject the null hypothesis or accept the null hypothesis. The former is preferred by many authors of statistics, while the latter is preferred by most authors of social research. If the p-value is less than 0.10, then reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternate hypothesis. Another is with these hypotheses. The null hypothesis is there is no significant difference in the monthly allowance of students when grouped according to gender. The alternate hypothesis is there is a significant difference in the monthly allowance of students when grouped according to gender. The decision rule if the level of significance is set at 0.05 would be, if the p-value is greater than or equal to 0.05, then do not reject the null hypothesis. If the p-value is less than 0.05, then reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternate hypothesis. This marks the end of our lesson on steps in hypothesis testing.